Garp chases Luffy across the entire first season of Netflix's One Piece. Ship to ship, island to island, always one step behind, always closing in. It's tense, it's propulsive, it's genuinely well-built television. It's also something that never happens in the manga. Garp never hunts Luffy through the East Blue. He barely appears at all until the story is already deep into the Grand Line, and when he finally does confront his grandson, it's a single scene, not a season-long chase. Netflix built an entire manhunt out of a relationship that, on the page, Oda was in no hurry to explain. That's not a nitpick, that's the whole video, because once you start noticing it, you realize almost every major structural choice in the Netflix adaptation comes from the same place. Islands stop being places and start being plot beats. Characters get previewed on wanted posters before they've earned a single scene. Baroque Works stops being a mystery you stumble into and becomes a season-long thread that's visible from episode 1. None of this is Netflix doing the story wrong. It's Netflix doing television right. And television and adventure, it turns out, want two completely different things from a story. Today we're breaking down exactly where that fight shows up, why it's not really about speed at all, with results that prove the point better than anything Netflix has done. Let's start with Garp, because it's the clearest example of a manga vacuum getting filled with television plumbing. In the source material, Vice Admiral Garp is barely a presence during the East Blue. He shows up in a handful of early panels, disappears for what amounts to hundreds of chapters, and the reveal that he's Luffy's grandfather doesn't land until the story is deep into the Grand Line, well past the point most adaptations would consider Season 1. Kobe and Helmeppo end up under his wing off-page. Luffy just sails away, and the story never looks back. Showrunner Stephen Maida has been candid about why that wouldn't work for a television season. He said outright that Garp barely existed in the first 100 chapters, and that his decision to build an active antagonist chasing Luffy from the start was a deliberate structural choice. Because television, unlike a weekly manga chapter, needs something pulling the audience forward across 8 hours in one sitting. The Grandpa reveal, which Oda takes his time getting to, was moved to land at almost exactly the season's halfway point, on purpose, as a mid-season gut punch. Here's the thing worth sitting with. The manga's East Blue arc has no hunter in it at all. Nobody is closing in on Luffy. He isn't running from anything. He's a kid in a straw hat sailing from island to island because he wants to see what's on the other side of the map, and the story is confident enough to let that be the entire premise for 100 chapters. There's no ticking clock. There's no marine breathing down his neck. The tension comes from the ocean itself, from not knowing what's over the horizon, not from somebody chasing him across it, but television doesn't trust that. A season needs a spine, a villain with a face, stakes that escalate episode over episode. So Garp gets pulled forward by decades, turned from an absent grandfather into an active antagonist, and the entire East Blue saga gets reorganized around a pursuit the source material never bothers to include. Therefore, what you get in Season 1 is faster, tighter, and more conventionally structured as drama. And what you lose is the specific, almost lazy freedom of a boy sailing because he feels like it, with nothing behind him and nothing forcing his hand. Garp's absence in the manga isn't a gap Oda forgot to fill, it's the point. Luffy's early voyage works precisely because no one is making him hurry. It helps to remember just how low stakes the manga's opening chapters actually are. Luffy leaves home, and the next real threat he runs into is Alvida, a low-level East Blue pirate captain who exists mostly to introduce Kobe and get punched off her own ship. There's no manhunt attached to any of it. Buggy shows up next, and even that fight resolves in a handful of chapters before the crew simply moves on. Oda spends this stretch establishing rhythm, not raising stakes, the calm of a small boat drifting between minor scuffles, long before the story asks anyone to worry about something bigger than whether Zoro can find breakfast. Television doesn't get to open that quietly. A pilot has to hook people fast, and a season needs escalating pressure by design, so Garp's manhunt does double duty. It gives the early episodes a threat before the manga would ever bother introducing one, and it retroactively makes every East Blue stop feel like a step ahead of pursuit rather than a step toward nowhere in particular. Season 2 picks a much harder problem to solve, and it's worth understanding what that problem actually is. The season covers Reverse Mountain through the recruitment of Chopper on Drum Island, Whiskey Peak, Little Garden, the Rumbar Pirates and Laboon, Smoker's introduction, and Vivi joining the crew. Crucially, it stops there. The full Alabaster War and Crocodile's actual plan are being held back entirely for Season 3, the Battle of Alabaster, arriving in 2027. That's a direct response to criticism that Season 1 tried to cram too much into too little runtime. But here's where the efficiency versus adventure tension shows up again, just in a subtler form. In the manga, Whiskey Peak is a genuine mystery. You don't know these bounty hunters are working for a secret organization. You don't know Vivi is a princess. You don't know any of it connects to anything yet. It's just a strange town full of people who get suspiciously friendly with pirates and then try to kill them in their sleep. The reveal that this is all Baroque works comes gradually, arc by arc, and for a long stretch, the reader is as disoriented as the crew. Season 2 can't afford that disorientation. Baroque Works needs to function as connective tissue across 8 episodes that all have to feel like they're building towards something, so the organization gets established earlier and more clearly than the manga ever bothers to. Every island stop becomes a checkpoint on the way to Alabaster, rather than a surprise you happen to wander into. And even then, notice what the show still finds room for. Little Garden's giants, Dory and Broggy, locked in a duel that's been going for 100 years over a broken promise neither of them fully remembers correctly anymore. That subplot has nothing to do with Crocodile. It fails to move the Alabaster plot forward 1 inch. It's pure texture, the manga equivalent of pulling over on a road trip because the view is nice, not because the map told you to. Take Vivi. In the manga, nobody tells you she's a princess the moment she comes aboard. She travels under a false name, gets introduced as Miss Wednesday, and her real identity only surfaces in pieces, arc by arc, as her cover keeps almost slipping. The reader spends real time simply liking her before finding out why she matters politically. Compress that into 8 episodes building toward a war, and the show doesn't have room to let that mystery breathe the same way. Her stakes need to be legible early, so the audience knows what it's rooting for by the time Alabaster actually arrives. None of this has hurt the show's reception. Season 1 landed a strong certified fresh score with critics and an even higher audience rating, and Season 2 was received even better, with critics praising its scale and its willingness to let scenes sit for once. That's worth sitting with because it proves the two approaches aren't a matter of quality. Season 2 is a better piece of television than Season 1 by most measures, and it's still structurally incapable of letting an island exist just because Oda thought it'd be fun to visit. Therefore, Season 2 ends up as a genuinely well-reviewed piece of television that's more confident and more spacious than Season 1, and it still can't fully escape the instinct to make every stop justify its own existence. Islands become necessary stops on the way to Alabaster. In the manga, they're closer to accidents Luffy happens to have. Let's talk numbers for a second, because they make the shape of this problem very concrete. Season 1 adapts roughly 100 chapters, somewhere around 60 anime episodes, into 8 episodes totaling under 460 minutes. That's not a small compression. That's the entire East Blue Saga, reduced to about a third of its original screen time, even accounting for the anime's own padding. Something has to go, and what goes first is exactly the stuff that never moves plot. Django, the hypnotist mook from the Buggy arc, gets cut from the story entirely and reduced to a face on a wanted poster in the background. Zoro's solo takedown of the pirates guarding Arlong Park, a scene that exists purely to remind you he's terrifyingly strong on his own, disappears because the show has the Straw Hats arrive as a group instead of in separate waves, which was the whole reason that Solo Moment existed in the first place. Small character beats, minor detours, the little scenes where the crew just sits around and talks to each other, get quietly trimmed to keep the runtime moving toward the next necessary plot event. None of these cuts are wrong exactly. They're the correct triage decisions for an 8-episode television season, with a real budget and a real runtime. But look at what they have in common. They're not cutting bad material. They're cutting slack. The moments that exist because Oda wanted to spend time with these characters, not because the plot required it. Look past the big cuts, and the smaller ones tell the same story. Yosaku and Johnny, the small-time bounty hunters who tag along with Zoro for a stretch of the East Blue Saga, never make it into the show at all. Neither does Narco, the doctor who patches Zoro up after his duel with Mihawk in the source material, which is why the live-action version has to quietly hand that job to Zeph instead. None of these are characters anyone would call essential to the plot. That's exactly why they were the first things cut. They exist in the manga purely to make the world feel populated, to give Zoro someone to bicker with on a slow afternoon, and a television budget with a runtime to hit has no line item for that. The manga's East Blue saga is full of scenes that don't advance anything. Long meals, long arguments, Usopp telling an elaborate lie nobody believes for pages at a time, Luffy falling asleep at the worst possible moment. None of it is efficient. All of it is why the crew feels like people you'd want to be stuck on a boat with, rather than a cast assembled to clear plot checkpoints. Therefore, the compression isn't really the problem people think it is. Fans often frame the criticism as the pacing is too fast, but that's not quite it. Season 2, at a similar runtime ratio, gets far better reviews specifically because it slows down and breathes more than Season 1 did. The actual tension isn't speed, it's that every minute of runtime in a television season has to be accounted for, has to earn its place, has to serve something, and adventure, by its nature, is what happens in the minutes that don't have to earn anything. Now here's a smaller detail that reveals the same instinct working on individual characters instead of whole arcs. If you paused the trailer for Season 1 or looked closely at the wanted poster board in Town, you'd have spotted 3 names that don't matter yet: Cavendish, Bellamy, and Foxy. None of these characters appear as actual people in Season 1. They're background dressing, bounty posters glimpsed for a second, teasing pirates who, in the source material, don't show up in the story until hundreds of chapters later. Bellamy doesn't debut until chapter 222, and Foxy waits even longer than that, all the way to chapter 305. In the manga, you meet these characters when they matter, and not one page sooner. Bellamy shows up to mock Luffy's dream and gets humiliated for it in real time. Foxy shows up to hijack a Davy backfight you've never heard of, and the entire concept gets explained as it happens. There's no advance warning. The discovery is the point. Netflix, by comparison, is playing a much longer game with a much shorter runway. If the show wants Cavendish's eventual reveal to land for viewers 3 or 4 seasons from now, it needs to plant a seed today, while the East Blue setting still gives it a plausible excuse to put his name on a poster. So the wanted board becomes a kind of checklist, a preview of who's going to matter, delivered well before they've done anything to earn your attention. That's efficient. It saves the show from a future episode of pure exposition, but it also changes what discovering these characters feels like. Instead of surprise, you get anticipation. Instead of meeting Foxy, the way the manga does, as a shock, mid-scene, explained on the fly, you're meant to recognize a name you were quietly primed to notice 100 episodes earlier. It's not just characters, either. Pieces of lore get seeded early for the same reason. The legend of Liar Noland, a fairy tale that doesn't pay off until many chapters later, has reportedly already been dropped somewhere in the East Blue setting, well before there's any story reason to bring it up. The manga tells you that story when it's relevant and not a page before. The show plants it early, so a future season doesn't have to stop and explain it from scratch. Therefore, even the show's Easter eggs are doing plot management. Nothing gets introduced just because the world is big and strange and full of people worth bumping into eventually. Everything that appears is there because it will matter, and you're being told that in advance. That's the real twist here. It's not that Netflix doesn't understand One Piece, and it's not that the writers made a mistake. It's that adventure, as a feeling, is built out of exactly the material that any efficient cut of a story will always remove first, because that material was never trying to be efficient. Oda can afford to let Luffy waste an afternoon fishing because nobody's forcing him to hit a runtime, a television season, or even a fan edit built entirely out of love for the source material cannot. Even Oda's own recent chapters get accused of exactly this problem in reverse. Since the final saga began, plenty of longtime readers have complained that the story has slowed to a crawl, that the ratio of build-up to payoff has tilted too far toward build-up during stretches like the God Valley flashback, and that a saga carrying this much weight keeps finding new reasons to pause before it swings. Oda himself has reportedly said in the past that the series should have wrapped up by now, more than once, and it hasn't, which tells you the tension runs in both directions. Too much wasted time, and momentum stalls even for the man who invented the format. Too little, and you stop believing anyone on this ship is actually free to waste any at all. Luffy, across almost 30 years of manga, is defined by choosing to stop. He naps when he shouldn't. He wanders off to look at something shiny. He decides the destination can wait because the island looks interesting. In the live-action version, he's rarely given that choice because Garp is behind him and Baroque Works is ahead of him, and the season only has 8 hours to get him from one to the other. So no, the problem was never that the Netflix show moves too fast. The problem is that efficiency and adventure are natural enemies, and every adaptation, every fan edit, every attempt to make this story leaner eventually has to choose one over the other. As always, thank you for watching and have a nice one.